So, welcome everyone. This is practicum session about the nodes and the rulers of the node. The focus is going to be examining how the rulers can affect the dynamics of our analysis, which is a very important factor in the synthesis of the nodes. So I'll just go very briefly. I'm just muting some of you because some background noise. Carol, if you can mute. So I'll just go with you over some of the important principles. Some of you may already know this, but it's always good to, go over everything again. So what are the nodes, right? That's the first question. We have the sun orbiting around the Earth, at least from our point of view. And then we have the moon's orbit. So we see that what we call the ecliptic is going to be that purple line. All right, please mute yourselves. So the purple line is the path of the sun, which is called the ecliptic. And then the path of the moon is the yellow line, which crosses the path of the sun in 2 points. So there's a 5-degree angle maximum between the path of the moon and the path of the sun. So we already know the nodes are intersection points. They're not planets. There's nothing physical happening there, but it is that meeting point between path of the sun, path of the moon, and so it serves like a portal where these two energy meet at that point. And that's why we need to pay attention to two important phenomena. One is each time the moon conjuncts the nodes and is going to be on one of these points. Sue, please mute. Okay, let me see. Hello, hello, hello. So we're paying attention to when the moon is going to be on one of the nodes. If it's in the northern hemisphere, it's going to be the north node. If it's in the southern hemisphere, it's going to be on the south node. And we're going to try to identify, I've made a, somewhat of an illustration to show you what happens. So every month, the moon goes through the whole zodiac. And so during that month, it's going to cross the north node once and then the south node another time. So the moon is going to be on its own node twice a month. And you will see when we look at the data, when the moon is on the node, it's going to be at what we call 0 latitude, because it's going to be right on this point. The latitude is measuring how far the planet is from the ecliptic. So when the moon's on its own node, 0 latitude, when will the moon be 5 degrees up? When it squares the nodes. So that when the moon is squaring the nodes, it's as far as it can be from that intersection point. Let's look at this. I'm going to come back to this. So you see, this is a month ago. The moon was in Capricorn, conjunct the south node. And you see here the data, 10-degree Capricorn, the speed that it travels, 12 degrees per day, 1250, and the latitude is 0. Declination is another thing. We're not going to talk about it now, but latitude is 0. And that's what happens. So when the moon is conjunct the north node, 0, then when it squares the nodes, 5 degrees, and then it squares the node, and then it conjuncts the south node now, 0 latitude, and then it squares the node, but from the south. So it's going to be -5 latitude. So here it's +5, and here it's -5. Now, a question to you. South node is now in Capricorn, north node in Cancer. So when the moon is in Cancer, currently about 8 degrees Cancer, it's here. Then the moon moves to Libra, squares, 5+. Then the moon goes to Capricorn, 0 latitude, conjunct the south node. Then when it's in Aries, it's -5. Okay, does that make sense? So here you can basically see, Dominique, I'm going to close your camera. So here you can basically see that monthly motion of the moon and how it creates this dance around the ecliptic. And over a year, that's a month, 1 month it does 1 loop above, 1 loop below. And then for 12 months, it's going to do 12 undulations like that. And that's why, we refer to the nodes as a snake, because the moon is snaking. As it goes up and down, it's snaking on the ecliptic in this fashion. Okay? Now, the second thing we need to pay attention to is not just when the moon is on the nodes, but when the sun is on the nodes, which obviously refers to the time when we are close to an eclipse. So when the sun is on it is on the moon node, it's right at that intersection point. And then if they both are there, the sun and the moon, we have an eclipse. New moon on the nodes, solar eclipse. Full moon on the nodes, lunar eclipse. Question so far? Does that make sense? All right, all clear. So let's go one moment to solar fire. So the moon was in Libra 2 days ago, something like that. So on January 16th, you can see here the moon at 9 Libra squaring the nodes. You go to your reports and you see here moon 9 Libra, travel 14 degrees, latitude +5. So the latitude is where the planets are in relation to the ecliptic. Then if you go 2 weeks later, that's going to be 16, no, yeah, 2 weeks later, it's going to be early February. End of January. Here you have the moon square the nodes from the other end, Aries. You look at the reports again. Moon in Aries, -5 latitude. Okay, so this gives you an understanding of what these two circles, you know, how they work and how we actually find the nodes. We find the nodes by finding when the moon is at 0 latitude. We know that then it's at, you know, it's right on the sun ecliptic and there's 0 latitude, and that's how we identify the nodes. As you know, the nodes move backwards, always retrograde most of the time. And when the sun is conjunct the nodes, they don't move. They kind of freeze on the same degree. I'll show you right now. Electional search. Right now, you know, the sun is close to the nodes. We had 2 eclipses end of December. So this is the ephemeris. I'm going to actually simplify this. Let me see. It doesn't let me. So this is an ephemeris from the beginning of December 2019 into now. So you see the nodes are 8 degrees Cancer Capricorn. And they stay on the same degree, retrograde, direct, retrograde, direct. They freeze on that degree until end of January. January 29, they move to 7 Cancer Capricorn. So basically, from the end of November to the end of January, we had the nodes freezing on the same degree, and the reason is that the sun was close to the nodes. So when the sun is close to the nodes freeze. And that degree becomes very important. So 8 degrees Cancer Capricorn becomes as important as an eclipse degree. So the solar eclipse was at 4 Capricorn, the lunar eclipse was 20 Cancer, but the degree that the nodes froze at was 8, and that's an important degree. So you can only see that using true nodes. You may know some people, you know, there are 2 measurements. One is called the mean node, one is called the true node. So the mean node is an average position, whereas the true node is measuring more specifically these variables. And we actually see where the moon conjunct those nodes. I have no idea why people use mean nodes. To me, it doesn't make any sense. But there may be an explanation that I'm not aware of. However, for our purposes, to see the motion of the nodes, to see how they turn direct, we use true node. So the mean nodes are never direct. They're always in a regular retrograde motion. So back to our data here. So the full cycle of the node is about 18 and a half years. They come back in a reversed order every 9.3 years. Solar eclipse, lunar eclipse, we talked about that. Now, interpretation. When you want to understand the nodes, you don't only look at their placement by house and sign, you have to look at the ruler, because you're going to have a radically different story. So the South Node, as you know, what I bring from the past, what I've already worked on, what's familiar, and what are my gifts. So the things that I offer to this world. There's nothing negative about the South Node. It has a really bad reputation, probably because of Vedic astrology that has a different interpretation on the nodes. But from our point of view, evolutionarily speaking, the South Node is a positive, powerful force. It's helpful. It basically describes what we have, what we bring, you know, all the gifts that we're coming with. But then, as we said, it can become too comfortable. You know, it can become a point of stagnation. And that's why we need to reach the North Node to balance the energy of the South Node. So we learn about the North Node. Usually it's a new energy. And as we learn about the North Node, we look at the ruler of the North Node. How does it add? Now, I often see in students' homework, they make a little mistake there. They describe the node, like you have your homework about the nodes, and you say, you know, oh, this guy has a South Node in Scorpio, so they come from, you know, challenging emotional dynamics, and they have the North Node in Taurus, so they learn to rely on themselves and, you know, stabilize their lives. Fair enough. Then you know, people speak about planets on the nodes, and only later do they mention the rulers. Oh yeah, the ruler of the South Node is in Leo, and the ruler of the North Node is whatever. No, doesn't work that way. You have to analyze the South Node. You immediately go to its ruler because they are tied together. They're like one unit. And that will give you the complete picture of what happens in the South Node. Only after you're done with the ruler do you move to the North Node and then its ruler. So they have to work together. Always our evolutionary purpose is to master the nodes. And what I mean by that is we move beyond the duality of the nodes. So once we move to the North Node, there will be life circumstances that will prompt us to remember our South Node, to come back to it, to incorporate it into our lives. And that's the thing. These evolutionary lessons are not optional. You can't say, I don't like, you know, whatever my North Node or South Node is. Life will take you there. Life will, first of all, reactivate your South Node. So the South Node is the first energy you will experience in this incarnation. Even when you look at the chart of children, young children, you will often see that they express their South Node more easily than their own sun sign. Because the sun sign is an energy that you're building, you're developing, you know, you're growing into your sun. But the South Node is your immediate reflex. You know, it's an emotional signature that is really describing who you are very uh, accurately. And then the ruler has to come with it as well, as we said. So life will create all kinds of dynamics that will capture the energy of your south node. Now, if this south node is very challenged, you know, you have a lot of difficulty there and challenging aspects, it can create difficult early life circumstances. And we're going to use some examples to try to see what these can be. So the south node, you know, just captures where you left off. You know, that's who you are, that's what you bring. It can be gifts, it can be challenges, it can be, you know, memories of grandeur, it can be memories of poverty. Each signature will have its story. And the North Node is an energy that life will push you towards, whether you agree to it or not. You will have to learn that lesson. Now, as we've discussed in the course, if you have many planets on the South Node, a lot of energy on the South Node and nothing on the North Node, even though you're going to taste from this North Node repeatedly, life will take you there, you will not integrate it early in life. It's always going to remain a more foreign energy to you. And then as you move into your 40s, the second half of your life in a way, you incorporate more of that North Node. So that's only when planets are on the South Node and there's a need kind to chew on it some more, to recapture more of what it means. Any questions so far? So this is again an ephemeris when the sun, you see the sun, moon is close to the nodes and the nodes are not moving. Last year in 2019, that degree was 26 Capricorn, Cancer. So some people ask, well, I have the nodes direct, I'm very special. Well, if you have the nodes direct, very likely the sun is not too far from the nodes. And that makes you special, not because of the retrograde or the direct, but because the sun is there. But does it really matter, you know, if it's direct or retrograde? Are you going to have a different evolutionary experience? No. Same path, same intensity, same lessons, as far as I can tell. Would you say that if they are Capricorn South Node, that they have learned to a certain degree the other signs leading up to it? Not clear on your question. What do you mean the other signs leading up to it? Aries, Sag? No, I wouldn't say that. I don't think so. I would focus essentially on the sign itself and on the ruler. That's going to give me the indication. Now, we are in a very, very unique time now because for 2 years or a year and a half, you see now, this is the chart of today, the South Node is in Capricorn And the ruler, Saturn, is also in Capricorn. So now, if we look at this particular configuration, this is a great example, today's chart. South node in Capricorn, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planets conjunct the south node. Nothing on the north node. The north node is isolated. And there's nothing really squaring the nodes, maybe Chiron. So when a planet squares the nodes, we have that flip-flop between north and south node, and it creates, it means that the person has already been working on the north node. But, let's leave Chiron aside now. If someone's born today, and they're born with that Jupiter on the south node, number 1, then the ruler Saturn, also in Capricorn, conjunct Pluto, conjunct the sun. All that is telling me where this person is coming from. So I'm not just looking at the south node in Capricorn and saying, oh, you were a leader and you had many responsibilities. You had to take care of, many things. But I'm seeing, Saturn is conjunct Pluto. So there was a very deep, intense Plutonian story to your past life. Now I see Jupiter on the south node, and I'm saying, you're a great teacher. You were really someone, who came here with an immense vision. And you were someone who was a bit overpowering, because Jupiter on the south node means that, you're so infused with your beliefs and your vision that you may at time be overconfident, come on too strong. Still, we see here the south node of a master, someone who was a teacher, someone who was on top of his game or her game, and who inspired probably many people, yet in a very powerful, strong, perhaps dogmatic way, inflexible, a level of rigidity, but definitely someone who may have been involved in politics, who was part of the system. And because if we use this time, now let's look at this particular time and let's see that it's in the 11th house, then we see that the leadership extends to groups and that the leadership had something visionary, futuristic, because it's an Aquarius house. So definitely someone who may have had spiritual presence and led groups, cults, movements on a large scale basis. Now we also look at the ruler Saturn conjunct Pluto and conjunct the sun, adding, more of that leadership. But the Pluto conjunct Saturn tells me there was some shadow work there. There were many questions about the right years of power. And there may have been, double standards. The person here may not have walked their talk. So it may have been someone who was very powerful, influential, intelligent, wise, but came on too strong. Now, I also look at Mars in Sag, and that Mars is on an angle. Planets on the MC or the ascendant are going to be dominating. So we see an even more aggressive way of promoting my ideas, very assertive. Mars on an angle can be too pushy. And then we see this lonely North Node in Cancer that says, your lesson is to soften. Your lesson is to accept vulnerability. Well, good to know, but that's not going to happen early on. This is a person that will immediately, as they come into this life, take the reign and start giving orders to everybody. They're going to boss their parents around. And they are going to tell everybody, what's the right way to do things. What are they going to do socially with their friends? They're going to be the leaders. So this is a super, super strong child who will have bright ideas and will not want to be a child in the first place. This is a kid that's going to be very mature, very wise, and very bossy, controlling. And this is a child that will not accept authority very easily unless the authority is super, super strong. Because if they have a parent that's hesitating, that doesn't really know what they want, that, say something one day and another thing another day, this child is going to run them over. It's going to take charge. So they need authority figures who know what they're doing, and then they're going to follow that authority. But otherwise, they're not going to rely on weak people. They're not going to rely on vulnerable people. They're not going to show any sign of vulnerability themselves. But then we look at the North Node, it's in the 5th house, the house of creativity, the house of children. So we see that by having a child, this person may learn that Cancer lesson. Now we look at the ruler of the North Node. Oh, a Scorpio moon. It's getting very emotional. Like the Scorpio moon adds to that Cancer vulnerability, and it goes to the emotional wounds, to the insecurity, to the fear of abandonment, to the need to be sheltered and loved, and it's not taken for granted with the Scorpio moon. So you see that South Node is so controlling and confident and visionary, and it's moving to a place where it needs to recognize that it's not enough to build empires. You need a healthy family life. You need to be kind to those around you. So that's a question to you now. How do you think, what kind of circumstance could happen in this person's life for them to access that North Node and the ruler, the moon? What may happen? Tracy says trauma, but what kind of trauma? Having a baby would shake things up, such as, let's be more detailed. In extreme case, it could be even a baby that dies. Learn how to soften, yes. A traumatic birth, even that. I mean, we understand that the child is going to serve the purpose to teach this individual to re-engage with their emotional body. Because without the North Node, with all that Capricorn and Saturn and Jupiter, they are not in their emotional body. They're in their mental body, they're in their physical body, they're in their spiritual body. No emotions there. It's all knowledge and structure and leadership. So we see that something needs to happen for them to re-engage in their vulnerability, and that can be an emotional shock. You think you're not vulnerable? Well, what if your child may not survive? Are you now going to get in touch with your emotions? And Tracy said, the child may die. That's an extreme scenario. That would be, the most intense shock. But it could happen with the Scorpio moon here. Now, what could also happen in a more, in a more gentle way? Yes, through the child, this person will do some shadow work. Now, if I lose my child and suddenly I can't function, I'm so, grief stricken that, I can cope, and I need to now examine my emotions. Maybe I need to go to a psychologist to help me to do this shadow work of the moon, But, it may happen in a much more subtle way, that this person has a child, and in their typical South Node in Capricorn, they want this child to be, to go to the best schools and to perform very highly and to be very successful. And this child, is a boy that's a big girly boy. It's a very sensitive boy. And this boy, the moment the father, comes up with expectation, that boy shuts down and they don't do well at school. So it's a vulnerable child that doesn't respond to this whole Capricorn mastery and, high level of performance. So the father can choose two ways. The father with this chart will say, okay, I need to soften because my child is basically shutting down and my child is not doing well and they're not coping at school and they're being bullied. And I need to, to get closer to them. Or it can be a father that says, God, this child is so weak, I don't want to deal with them. They're a disappointment to me. And so they revert back to their South Node, rejecting the North Node. And that leads to even more psychological problems. So the child may feel closer to the mother, but then what happens in teenage years? They start acting out, they start doing drugs, they start, there may be some sexual abuse, all kinds of things that are not working and prompt this parent to stop trying to fix things with a stick and start softening, talking to the child. So when we said there's a lot of energy on the South Node, which means the tendency to repeat the South Node is going to be stronger. This means that this person will constantly attract the Cancer energy, like we described the child scenario, but they won't feel comfortable with that Cancer energy until much later in life, usually past their 40s. And so they may not connect to this child until the child eventually becomes an adult, and that child, leads their own life and they're doing well, but differently. And then this person may suddenly realize, maybe I was not an easy parent. And maybe then, they realize as they move into their 40s and 50s and 60s, they realize that it's not worth the battles. They're becoming more humble, and they start to be more connected to that Cancer nurturing energy. And they want to reconnect with that child as an adult and, maybe forgive each other and whatnot. You see what I mean with the timing? Because there's no energy on the North Node, it may be realized later. That doesn't mean that the person will not experience the North Node right away, but they won't sit there. They won't accept it until later in life. The reason is that they need to finish something about the South Node. So Bernadette asked, what about Venus, Neptune? Could that help soften, maybe falling in love? Well, if you remember, Venus in Pisces and Neptune in Pisces are very impersonal. They're very idealistic. These are people who want to help and save the world, but they're not necessarily intimate and personal. So, someone with Venus, Neptune is someone who can be polygamous. They don't have boundaries. They fall in love with everybody. So if we go back to the South Node with someone who is a leader and a visionary, and then you have that Venus, Neptune, I would expect there's a lot going on in that commune. Everybody's going naked, Pisces, and it's kind of this free love atmosphere. Venus, Neptune, very idealistic, but it's not intimate, it's not emotional. It's just a spiritually inspired model of relationships. And then because it's Capricornian, you also have, you're forced to be free. Like if you want to be enlightened, you have to have sex with everybody. And if you cannot have sex with everybody, you're not free. You are, this is the typical chart of someone, who may have been in a Osho cult, where it's very rigid on the one hand, but it's rigid to force you to be free in a way that has nothing, is completely dissociated from the emotional body. Anyway, what we see here is definitely a need to slow down, North Node in Cancer, to listen, and to not only nurture my child, but to nurture myself. So this is an example how the rulers really will change the storyline. And as I said, we live in very interesting times because the ruler of the South Node in Capricorn is in itself in Capricorn, which makes it such a powerful double signature. Now, with Pluto involved, all these people born now are not just Pluto-Saturn babies. They're Pluto-Saturn ruler of the South Node, which means that they bring the Pluto-Saturn energy in a much more intense, it's part of their soul journey. It's the immediate thing they're going to recreate in their early childhood. They're going to come with a Pluto-Saturn suitcase. And they're going to unpack that right away as they arrive into this incarnation. If it was not the ruler of the South Node, say the South Node was in Gemini, but they still had a Pluto-Saturn, they would experience it at some point. It wouldn't be so immediate, so primal, so, interwoven into their consciousness. Does that make sense? So here are some examples. Let's look at this chart. So this is a series of charts with people born with a South Node in Sag, North Node in Gemini. So the South Node in Sag represents, in a very generalized way, people who, let's say as a Sag Gemini is an educational axis. So people with this axis usually have been involved with cultural development, knowledge, wisdom, educational systems, migrations, movement. So these people may have been, involved with different cultures, and they've studied life, and they looked for meaning. So now we move to the South Node in Sagittarius, people who were explorers, who needed to understand life and had to discover it themselves through their own personal experience. It's a fire sign, so there's something that's immediately personal. So maybe they learned from, they were very religious, and there was a very strong spiritual overlay. Now, another thing you always need to remember, because these are nodes of the moon, they also represent the mother. So when we have a South Node in Sagittarius, this is a mother that can be very vocal, outspoken. She can be very strong in the family. We hear her from afar. She's loud. And she may have very strong opinions. So you would look at the moon in Pisces and you'd say, oh, she's discreet and she's actually very, quiet, but not the case. If the South Node is in Sagittarius, it also captures the energy of the mother. So this is a mother that is a combination of Sagittarius and Pisces. So she's definitely going to have some kind of big picture perspective, some kind of spiritual or religious involvement. And the child, internalizes that. So, the South Node in Sagittarius, as we said, is someone who went through a personal journey. There's a tendency to be closer to nature, closer to the elements, wanting to live life more authentically, to be free from other people's opinion, from judgment. And so there's something very confident about a South Node in Sagittarius. And it's a South Node that, shows the tendency not to want to please anybody. So the Sagittarius South Node are people who want to teach. They come with knowledge, experience, vision. They traveled and they gathered that experience, and there's a need to share that because they strongly believe in what they came up with. And that's wonderful. Like we said, they can be natural teachers. They can be very authentic. They can really have a powerful and meaningful influence on people. The North Node in Gemini is about being more open to understand the context of my time. So if I'm a teacher, I need to know who my students are. I need to know how to talk to them, speak their language. So the North Node in Gemini is about being sensitive to your environment, being sensitive to what's appropriate and what's going on in the current times. So it's about updating yourself with new knowledge so that your personal wisdom can come through in a more effective, accessible way. If you stay in the South Node in Sag, it's someone who speaks without knowing where they are. They're not attentive to what's going on around them. So they can again come on too strong. It's the bull in the china shop. And they can think that they know everything to a point of, not realizing their personal blind spots. So the North Node in Gemini says you're not only a teacher, you need to also be a student. You need to continue learning, to open your mind to different ideas. So it's a very humbling North Node, the North Node in Gemini, because you realize that you don't know everything. And that even if you know a lot, you need to know how to unpack, how to deliver it. So you can also see a movement from the South Node in Sag to the North Node in Gemini. People who come from religious backgrounds, South Node in Sag, and they move to a more open-minded, modern perspective with the North Node in Gemini, and they realize they cannot just follow blind faith. So the Gemini North Node, prompt them to be more logical, to not just act on faith, but to also analyze situations, analyze why they do things. So they become more conversational. And if I have a North Node in Gemini, I need to ask the priest or the rabbi, why? How come God didn't know where Adam and Eve were hiding? God knows everything and sees through everything. How come, they went into hiding? I'm just using an example. But that's a North Node in Gemini. Like, it has to make sense. I'm not just going to take it for face value. So it makes, this may be someone who come from a religious background and now learns about other religions. Maybe they were Christians or Catholics, and they're now with the North Node in Gemini, they're learning about Buddhism, and they're traveling to Tibet, and they're bringing Eastern philosophies to the Western mindset. So the North Node in Gemini opens your mind to many different directions. It's not just one direction. So that's established. If we look at this particular chart, and this is a solar chart, but I think it's still very important. Let's look at the rulers. The ruler of the South Node is Jupiter, and Jupiter is in Cancer. And it's conjunct Uranus. What do you think about that? I'm going to be right back. In the meantime, you can type your thoughts about this. No answers. Well, people, that's the art of synthesis. That's how you, in astrology, you learn to put all the different pieces together. So you need to learn how that Jupiter in Cancer completes the South Node in Sagittarius. So Linda, a very rebellious, just a moment, expanding combination. Maybe the mother was like that, or the home emotionally expanding. Yes, but the mother is already in the South Node. So the Cancer add to the mother energy and the home environment. So indeed, it may have been a home where there's a lot of discussions, and there may be, a home where there's a lot of philosophy and a lot of religion happening. Sue says, break through their inherited legacy of knowledge and share a new elevated thought. But that's where they're coming from. So it's not a lesson. Someone successful in the past with innovative, sophisticated ideas, yes. So a strong teacher need to upgrade a belief system in regards to how they relate to people, family, yes. Hannah, a leader who was extremely progressive, creative, genius, seeded new ideas, but maybe too utopian and idealistic, not in touch with how things could really be integrated in the real world. Interesting. Expanding knowledge, innovative science, a spiritual teacher, to combine the mind and knowledge to expand the emotional and the personal. Okay, so we see that this Uranus with the Jupiter takes the Jupiter to a very advanced, elevated level of knowledge. We see that there's a family tradition, and that, I'm going to close the camera. So we see there's a family tradition here that may really encourage science and philosophy and higher knowledge. So there's something very progressive and thought-provoking and unique, and it brings the higher mind with the emotional mind, with the emotional body, excuse me. The Cancer is the emotional, Uranus, Jupiter, very high-minded. So this is someone, if they work well, who could really be very authentic, very natural, because that combination of Sagittarius and Cancer is very natural. You know, these are people who are who they are. They're not pleasers. They're not trying, you know, to showcase their knowledge. There's something very authentic. Take me as I am. And it can also be a very nurturing teacher. But it can also mean that they constantly analyze their emotions, right? Now, I go beyond that. Not only do I look at the ruler, Jupiter, but I also see that the ruler is conjunct Uranus. So whatever the configuration of the ruler adds to the story, so that Uranus obviously becomes inseparable from the Jupiter. But now I also see the sun is in Capricorn. So the sun tells me this person did something. This person actualized something. They had a purpose with that. It was not just ideas bouncing in the living room. They actually created something out of this. And in the Capricorn sun, they needed to do it, you know, in a very reliable, credible way. Emotional intelligence, combining spirituality and science, exactly. So the sun here adds, in Capricorn, adds a leadership, a creative expression to this philosophical quality. And we also see Neptune in Aries completing the triangle and trining the South Node. So the South Node in Sag, the ruler, Jupiter, involves Uranus and Neptune and Sun. So we know this is something bigger than normal. You know, all these three outer planets, very tight together, Sun, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, very high-minded. Again, bringing spirituality and science. It's a long tradition of teachers because of the Cancer Capricorn signature. But this person wants to upgrade it, take it to a new level. So you see between the Capricorn and the Cancer that there is a need to reconcile between the new generation and the older generation, the elder versus the younger. Neptune adds that transcendental quality, that understanding of higher forces. But we also see that this is a person with Neptune squaring all this that may have had to go through very intense personal sacrifices. Now I see all this is part of the South Node. You understand? This is the South Node story by association with Jupiter. Maybe this is a person with Neptune who did not lead a personal life and had to lead a more public life, serve the greater purpose, There's always with Neptune the need to address a larger cause, something larger than myself. So that Neptune sun says, it's not up to you and it's not about you. You're a vehicle for something bigger than yourself. And if you're strong enough, you're going to succeed. But if you're not, you may become overwhelmed. So we see this person has a history that's super interesting. That's very, very much of a teacher, of someone who had deep insight into larger cosmic riddles. Now, this may be your next door neighbor. Maybe he's a professor at the university teaching, comparative religion. Maybe this is someone who was born, a native in native cultures, and he's teaching that now, in a modern setting. So the North Node is in Gemini, and that North Node says, okay, you come with this big history, now you need to communicate it. You need to speak, to share, and to upgrade your knowledge to current circumstances. Because Gemini has to do with what are the current times? What's the current culture? We live in the 21st century. You cannot bring old ideas and present them in old ways. You can bring old ideas, but present them in new ways. So how is this going to translate through cell phones, through the internet? So the Gemini needs to adapt to how the culture is moving now, today. And we see the ruler of that is back to Mercury in Capricorn. So what do you think about that? How does this Mercury add to our story? Has to be structured correctly, as opposed to what? Mercury in Cap is about the system and the tradition. Could be a role to communicate the new and upgrade it back to the system. Strong, purposeful communication. Already thinking on a larger scale. I could see this person eventually being involved in children on human advocacy programs. Yeah. But now, what Tracy was saying is a mouthpiece for spirit. Yeah, but what's the Capricorn component of the ruler? Bringing wisdom from the water dimension into the earth dimension. So what does that mean practically? Like, give me a real life example. Values and ethics. Oh, we have an ethical dimension brought into this. Expanding the spiritual knowledge to others. But how? He's a guru already. I mean, there's some guru quality to this chart. So, when you look at the South Node in Sag, and the ruler Jupiter conjunct Uranus, square Neptune, this can be very vast knowledge, but it's not organized. This can be someone who has vast ideas and vision, but there's no strategy. It's not grounded. So the first thing is the North Node in Gemini says, okay, you need to listen more before you speak. Because when you listen, you'll know how to speak. But then we have an additional what do we call, directive factor. Mercury's in Capricorn, and Mercury says, really watch what you're saying. Make sure every word means something, that you're not just babbling and you're not just going on tangents. Teach this material in a very structured way. Build it. Because if you don't have that Mercury in Capricorn and you just have Uranus, Jupiter, Neptune, you're going to download something. It's not going to make sense. There's not going to be a beginning and an end. And it may be very inaccessible. So you see how this is a person who needs to do a lot of work to not just bring vast concept that can be hard for people to grasp, but to break it down to an accessible, progressive system. So communicate things, more gradually. Okay? And then, there's the ethical quality to Capricorn, and Mercury is not too far from Saturn. So there's a strong Saturnian component to knowledge. So this is someone who needs to be very mindful about how he or she uses knowledge. Is it their ideas? Are they quoting their source? Are they borrowing ideas from others, and infringing copyrights? Or is it done to them? Are people borrowing ideas from them without credit? Things like that. Be careful what you say. When you have a South Node in Sagittarius and Jupiter, Uranus, you may come up with vast ideas that are dangerous or intimidating. I'm going to say, well, there's a Pluto-Saturn transit and everybody's going to die. So is that a responsible statement? No, it's not. So I may come with all kinds of visionary, large-scale, information, but I need to know what impact it has and how to direct this knowledge constructively. That's the Capricorn, constructively. But that's the lesson, Anita. It's not when you say they have a good support system, because it's the North Node, it's something that needs to happen that may not be there in place yet. That's the direction they're taking. Same node, different chart. South Node in Sag. We know the story of South Node in Sag. Now the ruler, Jupiter, is in Taurus. And that ruler conjuncts Mars in Aries, and they're both in the 12th house. Not only that, Mars, Jupiter square the moon in Cancer. And it's an angular moon. So a powerful moon in Cancer. Square Mars, both in their own sign. Powerful. Jupiter, Chiron. So that's the South Node and its ruler. North Node is Gemini, we know, and the ruler is Mercury, also in Cancer and retrograde. So, what do you think? South Node is in Sag. It happens to conjunct Saturn. And the ruler is in Taurus in the 12th. What do you think? Where is he or she coming from? Okay, Jennifer says a position of wealth and authority. Now, if you speak about wealth, I assume you're mentioning the Taurus. So, two things we can say. This is a person who comes from very personal experiences and adventurous spirit and a lot of strong ideas. Now, because Saturn is there, it also gives them an authority. But there's also a karmic dimension to Saturn. Now, Jupiter is in Taurus. So all these ideas and vision may have manifested in the material world. So instead of being philosophical, maybe I'm a businessman and I bring this need to understand and for meaning in a very practical way. Someone who is owning land, yes, or authority, but it could also be someone who was living just close to the land, who was living in a rural area where there's a lot of expanse, open space, a lot of nature and open land. That could be also a scenario, a farmer, but because Saturn is there, I won't say he's just a farmer. Because with Saturn in Sag, there's someone here who comes with very strong ideas. Now, because the South Node is in the 7th house, how does that change the dynamics? Maybe they got this land and this money through marriage. Maybe they married someone wealthy with assets. Because the wealth comes from the ruler of the South Node in the 7th house. Number one. The 7th house is also the house of other people, other cultures, whoever is different from me. So this is a person that may have also connected with people from other cultures. Someone maybe who married into another culture. However, now you look at the ruler, Jupiter is in Taurus and it's in the 12th house. The 12th house is a house where we're not always in control. So if I have Jupiter in Taurus, I can bring a lot of material resources, but because it's in the 12th house, I may lose control of it. So this can be a scenario of tremendous wealth and bankruptcies if the money is not handled properly. It can also bring a spiritual dimension. Okay? Now, if we speak of philosophies, how does Jupiter in Taurus, add to my philosophies and my belief systems? That's a question to you. Traditional material, a healer who through his travel has learned and grown medicinal herbs, help, possibly practical and grounded belief. So what we see with Jupiter in Taurus is someone who is going to be very firm, very stubborn with their belief. Whatever they believe in, that's what it is. You're not going to influence them easily. So you see someone here with very strong opinions. And because it's Taurus, it's very internal. It's the fruit of their own entrails. It's integrated into their system. It's not flexible. So if it's just someone who lives on the land and who lives, a rural life, they're going to live in a very traditional way. They're going to do their own thing the way they know it, and nobody's going to tell them to change it. They know what they're doing, and it's working for them. So there's a level of tenacity, stubbornness, because it's so personal, Taurus. So it's not universal, Tusa, even though it's in the 12th house, that is a very open house. Because it's in Taurus, there's something very, very specific about it. It's not so wide. It's grounded. Now, it could be someone who has musical talent as well, right? Now, my next question, what's with the Mars? Jupiter conjuncts Mars in Aries, and they both square the moon in Cancer, angular. Pissed off ruler. How about sexuality? First of all, before sexuality, you see with Mars in Aries, there's a defensive attitude. You see this person was involved in battles. And these battles were ideological because of the Jupiter. So either he had to fight for his wealth and protect his assets. Maybe he felt because of a war or because of, a crisis that his land and his assets were in danger. Or it could be that his ideas, like he had to stick to his ideas. So that Mars in Aries adds to the intensity, the inflexibility of the Jupiter, because I have to protect something. There's a danger. He feels with that Mars, he feels the need to stand up for it. And it squares the moon in Cancer and the angles, which makes it even more emotional, even more personal. So you see, this is someone who probably experienced what? Some kind of cultural trauma involving a war that destroyed his home. Mars in Aries square the moon. Somebody is attacking my home. And it's in the 12th house, so I feel victimized. I feel that it was beyond my control. And I lost my money, and I lost possibly, very, a whole tradition. So there's something about this cross-cultural knowledge that, is fueling some trauma here. Could have been a healer burned for witchcraft. It could have been, definitely there's some persecution here. And Aries is definitely, bring the fire element. So you can say either they chopped his head off, because Aries is the head, and Mars in Aries is an injury to the head. Taurus is the throat. So you see, then can definitely be a guillotine where you cut the throat. But it doesn't matter, if they shot him in the head or if they burned him or her. What matters is that there was a battle, and that this person had to fight for their beliefs, and that they feel they need to protect something that's personal to them. And that there's an ambivalent relationship with the other because of that South Node in the 7th house. Maybe it's a connection to the parent, the father that was aggressive. Why the father? I would think of the mother here as aggressive. It's a moon Mars, and it's a nodal signature. Yeah, Mars and Saturn. But if they're connected with the nodes, you'll see them as mother related. So the North Node here is in Gemini. And the ruler is in Cancer, and it's retrograde. Okay? So what's the North Node in Gemini in the 1st house? I need to find my own voice. I need to listen to what's happening around me. I need to reestablish my sense of security. New ways of thinking about the self, absolutely. So there's definitely a need to open the mind, because the past life is so emotionally intense. And there's a feeling of threat and battles and protecting, some kind of ancestral lunar energy. And now the North Node in Gemini says you need to feel safer. and to open yourself up to other points of view, but in a way that, because Mercury is in the second house in Cancer, you still need to be yourself. You cannot, just open up to other people's idea and get carried away. It needs to be very grounded again. Sue says, through the thought needed to be totally changed in order to reevaluate their values. Reconsider their possession, realize their true tribal group. I would say group, because it's not Uranus, it's not 11th house, it's second house. Second house, Cancer. My stuff. Personal, not tribal. Communicate personal values. Now, this is when you have to be careful, because when you say communicate personal values, what does that mean? I go out and people and talk to them about what I value. I mean, how do you make this practical? But it does mean that I'm opening my mind while remaining very grounded, making deals with other people, but taking care of my personal gains and my personal side. Coming into their own sense of self. Yes. So, let me see. I want to move on without losing track of time. I want to move to this chart very quickly. Sorry about my allergies. Yes, safety in the family. So this is the next chart. Again, a south node in Sag, moon on the south node, Uranus on the north node. So there's energy towards the north node and the south node. So this is a person with a south node in Sag who comes, again, with a lot of knowledge, very direct, very expansive. And this person has Jupiter in the 11th house in Libra. What do you make of that? That moon on the south node in Sag, and then the ruler is Jupiter in Libra, in that stellium, conjunct Venus, the ruler of Libra. So it's a very Venusian Jupiter. So the question is if we speak of the mother and the south node, do we look at the south node or the north node? You start with the south node because that's usually where everything is coded. So usually you focus more on the south node, but if there's a lot of planets on the north node, you will also see the north node involved with that. So Linda says matriarch in an elite group. Okay. So a moon on the nodes, like we said earlier, this means that the moon is at 0 latitude. It's on its own node, so it's a very powerful moon. There's definitely a feminine presence here. So you're going to see strong women in this lineage. You have to ask about mother and grandmother and great-grandmother and the daughters. Like all the women of this family may be all wise women. They may all be, priestesses, because it's Sagittarius. There's a priest-like quality, higher wisdom. religion, rituals. And it's associated with the group because of the 11th house ruler. It's also associated with higher knowledge. So we bring again the science with spirit. And Jupiter with Venus is also in Libra, is also very open to different ideas and religions. So it's interesting that on the one hand, the South Node in itself, in the first house, conjunct the moon, is very protective, emotionally invested. Like we said, strong women with strong opinions. Then Jupiter in Libra is an air archetype, opens the mind to diversity. So you see a more open-minded Jupiter. It eases on the intensity of that first house Sag moon, which can be, you know, a bit defensive, protective. So this is someone who comes from past life where their whole sense of self was around knowledge, and family was, you know, about wisdom and knowledge, but they learned from many people. There was a lot of interaction. You know, maybe they were, you know, living during the Renaissance time where there was a lot of, you know, bouncing of ideas and a cultural revolution in Europe. And there's something elite, indeed, in the 11th house, which brings that element of, you know, being part of sophisticated groups, making important alliances, Venus alliances based on ideological, you know, ideological belonging. As I said earlier, stationary or direct nodes, same deal. It doesn't make a huge difference. Now, we see with all this Sag energy that this person also has the sun on an angle and it squares the node. So it's a very prominent sun. Which means, again, that sun brings purpose, creativity, leadership to this knowledge. North Node conjuncts Uranus. So Uranus takes us back to this 11th house. So he's definitely someone who is going to be so involved with knowledge and want to understand things from a higher perspective, whether it's scientific, whether there are group discussions. You know, this can be someone who's very involved with cultural studies, academic studies. Very much the chart of a professor of some sort. Yes, political family or academic family. I don't know if political, you need a stronger Saturn that's more immediately involved, or 10th house. But yeah, patronage and knowledge. And you have to ask your client, you know, religion versus science probably was a big deal in the upbringing. Now we go back to Mercury, the ruler of the North Node. So we see that this person needs to open up to new ideas. We see that he needs to upgrade. Uranus on the North Node, he needs to upgrade his way of thinking, break old patterns of thinking. So this is someone who's going to go through a revolution, an intellectual revolution. For example, this may be a scientist who discovers astrology and then, opens his mind that way, changes his perspective. Ruler Mercury in Virgo, we go back to the teaching, to the strategy, to learning to communicate very strategically, very, create order in the knowledge, discriminate knowledge. Yes, Jennifer, draws the attention to Libra 11th house versus 7th house Uranus. So there's a lot of Libra Uranus interplay between the nodes. Very analytical mind. Now that Mercury in Virgo, ruler of the North Node, says what? Yes, open yourself to new ideas, but Mercury in Virgo says discriminate, filter. See what works from all these ideas, check which one actually works. So Mercury in Virgo needs to put the ideas into practice and test them in reality. Otherwise, Uranus on the North Node can be too abstract, philosophical, talk for hours and gets carried away. Yes. Now, I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to go to, wait a minute. Yeah, let's look at who's who. So the first chart we looked at was Gurdjieff, South Node in Sag, the ruler Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune. So those of you who know Gurdjieff know he was a very important spiritual leader born at the end of the 19th century who had a massive influence on spiritual development. Came from Russia and moved to France and has, you can read one of his book, Meeting with Remarkable Men, kind of tells his biography. But needless to say, this is a person who was born a seeker. And he was born already looking for the deep answers and riddles of life. And he developed an extremely sophisticated body of knowledge that involved spirituality and science. And he developed a whole, not only knowledge, but he developed a whole practice of dance that was closely involved with Sufism and the dervish, the swirling dervishes. So you see that in the South Node, like he came here with that immense wisdom. And he became a teacher. He could, through that North Node in Gemini, unpack the knowledge. But he was controversial. And many people with that Mercury in Capricorn, many people, were not always, how to put it, the way he used the knowledge, the way he was working with his students was not always, you know, understood and well accepted. So there were controversies. The second chart with South Node in Sag conjunct Saturn and the ruler Jupiter Mars is a French politician called Jean-Marie Le Pen, who is a radical right-wing white supremacist. So you see here someone who come with Saturn on the South Node with a very, you know, political approach. There's a level of, again, a teacher, but also Saturn is very, in Sagittarius, is very prejudiced. And that's not enough. The fact that the ruler is in Taurus, which is so fixed, square, conjunct Mars and square the moon, you see how the nationalism here, Mars, moon in Cancer, I'm protecting my homeland. I don't want colored people. I want to protect the white race. So you see that, you know, extremely defensive, protective of my ancestry. And the fear of foreigners. Why the fear of foreigner? Because probably, like we said, there was a war and he felt under attack because South Node in the 7th house, there were invaders. So this is someone who probably comes from a past life where he was conquered by another culture, another race, and he lost, you know, his roots. But he was also someone who conquered other races. So you definitely have, with the Sagittarius and Mars moon involved, you have the conquest and who's going to win. And it's my flag versus your flag. And I'm not sure about his financial situation. It would be worth examining that. If there were, you know, if he was a businessman and if he received money from marriage. I don't have information on that. Well, I chose a flattering picture. The third chart is Liz Green, who's quite a famous astrologer. Most of you may know Liz Green. She wrote a lot of astrology starting from the late 70s, book on Saturn, and, you know, very scholarly, very Jungian. Like, she and her contemporaries really advanced Jungian psychology in the world of astrology. So that's when psychological astrology kind of took over the culture of astrology in the late 70s, early 80s. And she was one of the main writers. She's a very prolific writer, author. So you see that sun square the nodes, very strong woman, moon on the South Node, involved with astrology, 11th house, North Node in Aquarius, North Node conjunct Uranus. Uranus is often related to astrology. But you see with the South Node there and the ruler in the 11th house that she was probably doing astrology in past life. That's not something new to her. Because you see that the knowledge of the Sagittarius is directly into the 11th house. And she wrote books on relationships. So you see the the knowledge, Jupiter conjunct Venus, relating the lovers, like she has books on lovers. And interestingly also, for many years, she wrote with another man whose name was Howard Susportus. So they used to lecture together and write books together. So you see that collaborative effort with the Libra seventh house interplay. Okay. So I hope this gives you an understanding of how important the ruler is and how incomplete the information is without it. I'm going to use one of your charts. Today is Bernadette's birthday. So happy birthday, Bernadette, from Denmark. And she volunteered her chart. And guess what? She also has the nodes in Sag, Gemini, but the other way around. Now, what is interesting? She has both Saturn on the south node and Moon on the north node, and they're, you know, Saturn is in the Moon house and Moon is in the Saturn house. So it's quite interesting. It's a very, very interesting chart. Now, tell me what else do you see here that's really critical in the analysis? Thanks, Sue. Is Bernadette here with us? Let's first find out if she's still on board or if she's eating her cake.
I am here.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we'll get back to you for feedback, but I just want to ask everyone, what's so important and particular to this chart? Good. Betul, Tracy. The rulers of the nodes, Mercury and Jupiter, are in the same sign and conjunct. It's a wide conjunction, but it's a conjunction, and they're sandwiching the ascendant. So the rulers, when you have the rulers in an aspect like that, you know that there is a need to urgently resolve the nodal signature. So this is what we call a primary life. A primary life is a life that will seed the future lives. So whatever happens, whatever she realizes, whatever she works on in this life will set the tone for the next series of life. Now you may say, well, that's everybody. Whatever you do this life will impact the following ones. But that's what we call a primary life. You have main lives, you have main lives that, and then sub-lives. So the main life is kind of a life where so much is happening and there are very important lessons. And then the following subsequent lives are kind of processing, still chewing on what the primary life was about. So when you have the nodal rulers together, usually it indicates that this is one of those primary lives and that the nodal signatures are going to be, you know, really important. Now, interestingly, like we said, we also have powerful conjunctions to the nodes. That's what I mean, Atusa. The way to recognize a primary life is when the rulers of the nodes are either conjunct. That's one of the signatures. It's like a new cycle, seeding something new. So let's unpack what's in that south node. South node in Gemini. Now, conjunct Saturn, and all of this quincunx her natal sun, 29, 29, 28. And the moon north node. So it's really interesting. So what do you say? Let's start with the south node in the fourth house in Gemini, conjunct Saturn. Mother, who may have been an authority figure. You see a strong mother's signature from many places. The moon on top of the chart, moon on the nodes. So once again, this is going to be a 0 latitude moon. And then Saturn. So definitely very strong female lineage, not just the mother. When you have the moon on the nodes, it goes to the whole line of women in her family who were Sagittarius, teachers, priestesses, medicine women. If you have some Virgo, you can, you understand there was even the medicine, the remedies, not in this case, but in the 10th house, teachers, women teaching. A lot of knowledge and strong minds in the family line, absolutely. So keep going. What happened with this women teacher? What happened in this family of education? Try your luck. We don't have all day. So you see here Saturn on the south node. And you see that there may have been a lot of judgment. So on the one hand, you see the educators, people who had to teach, even if society didn't always approve of what they were teaching. This can be, for example, even women going to school when, the male tried to keep them at home. So they had to, fight the system. It's like today in Afghanistan where, girls cannot go to school and they have to work and help the parents. And there's oppressive conditions. So you see that Saturn on the south node shows that there were some judgment issues, that there were some controversial issues around education. and that women were not so free, even though they were masterful, they were not so free to go out and study. So you see that even though she comes with a lot of knowledge, she also has a fear of speaking and a fear of expressing her opinion, because there's a fear that she's going to say something that's going to be forbidden. And I'm saying that because Saturn is right there, and Saturn can show persecution, oppression. And Saturn also quincunx the Sun in Capricorn. So you see that's a double signature, Capricorn, Saturn. Exactly the same degree, and a quincunx, which shows that there was definitely, a lot of fear, a lot of rules, something dangerous, something not completely liberated about knowledge. And you see that the promise of the North Node is, Sag, speak out loud, say it, open your voice. You need to gain confidence as a woman teacher in this world. So you see that the promise of the North Node is to come out of the closet, is to shine your light, and it's to be, to say things out in the open in a very bold way, versus the South Node that had to hide and couldn't say things, and there were a lot of taboos and restrictions. Now we look at the rulers. Mercury is in Aquarius in the 12th house, and it's conjunct Venus, which again tells us she was studying sciences. She was studying advanced knowledge. And she was studying in groups. So there was something very philosophical and very high-minded about her studies and about her teaching. But you see that this squares Mars in Taurus. So Mars in Taurus says, do you have money? Mercury in Aquarius says, I want to do this. I want to learn that. I want to go there. Everything's open. Everything's possible. Let's explore the universe. Mars in Taurus says, can you afford it? So you have a challenge between ideas and practicalities. Now, as an astrologer, I also know that this Mercury energy is also about brothers and sisters. So I have to ask her if there was any problem, any behavioral issues with a sibling. Because that's Saturn in Gemini and the Sun quincunx and Mercury square Mars can show some ruptures or some learning disabilities associated with a sibling. So we keep that in mind, and we're going to ask our client. But now going to the North Node, we see the moon there, and like we said, do it, girl. And the ruler Jupiter is on the ascendant, and it's moving away from Mercury in the first house. So there's so much encouragement to just do it. First house, do it. Go to America, learn astrology. So you see that Aquarius, that she's meant to become an astrologer in this life. And not just an astrologer, a guide, a coach, an educator, a teacher. But you see that astrology with Aquarius is definitely very important in this chart. And Jupiter, the ruler of the North Node, on the angle, it's now. And whatever you learn in this life is going to set the tone for the next 7 lives at least. Now, you also know that this year we're going to have a Jupiter-Saturn at 0 degrees Aquarius. So this is going to be one of the most important years, 2020, 2021, because it's going to be on her sun, 0 Aquarius, 29 Capricorn, just a few minutes away. And then she's going to have Jupiter, Saturn going over all these Aquarius planets. So this is going to be an opportunity for her to, complete her studies, to start teaching, to begin a new cycle in her spiritual development, in her career development, and so forth. But you see how the South Node shows, on the one hand, that she comes from a lot of knowledge, but there's something forbidden about it. There's something oppressed about it. There's a fear, and there's guilt, Saturn guilt. I'm saying the wrong thing. I'm stupid. People don't understand me. And then the North Node with the moon is, shut up, I'm talking, listen to me. And I'm the priestess, and I'm going to take charge, and I'm going to help you. Confidence, fire, show your light. And it's the only fire in the chart, right? The rest is all air and earth, which is not emotional. There's no water in the chart, and there's just that North Node in fire. So people with a strong air earth are people who are very mental, very much in control. They think about everything they say. They have to be constantly measuring what they're doing. So they're very smart, but they're not spontaneous, and they don't let their emotions out. So you see how important that moon on the North Node is. It's very liberating. This is a message for a chart that needs liberation. So Bernadette, are you ready to liberate?
Yes. Yes, I am actually. Yeah, it has been hard, but I'm at a good point of liberating. I'm ready.
Okay.
Yes.
So tell us about your early life and how do you see the things we talked about?
It was so clear. It's so correct, all what you said. Yeah, I was was it called a scapegoat in the school. I was the little strange one. I was very mature as a child. I had a lot of responsible, and I was always afraid and shy and filled with guilt of explore myself. I did it.
Was it at the school, or was it in the family as well?
Yes, and not in my mother line, not with my mother and my grandparents there. They were very, very supportive.
Okay.
My mother had some anxiety and so on, so she had hard times. But there was so much love and encouragement and everything. Okay. My parents got divorced when I was 5, and at my father's house, he soon after got together with a woman, and there I felt so uncomfortable. Like I was so wrong at everything. I felt so misery there. I'm alone.
Interesting to see the two. Was it the stepmother who made you feel uncomfortable, or was it your father, or both?
Both, but mainly my stepmother. She was very cold and distant, and was not effective against me.
Affectionate.
Yeah, so I did not feel welcoming, and I felt so wrong.
And what did you feel like? Oh, I'm stupid, or they make me
Yes,
feel
I'm
stupid.
exactly so much.
Yeah. So you
Very
see,
much.
Saturn in Gemini can create that sense of insecurity with my intelligence,
Yes.
especially on the South Node and the quincunx to the Sun. So you see, it's interesting that you see on the one hand a very supportive mother, which is that node moon, but you also see the stepmother and the anxiety of the biological mother with the opposition to Saturn. The other thing you see, how do you see a stepmother? You see the sun is the father, and Venus is the marriage of my father. So you see that the mother and the Venus, and so excuse me, the father and Venus, there's a marriage here. And because that Venus squares Mars, it can create friction with the relationship. And it's also showing the divorce of her own biological parents, Mars square Venus. Parents didn't get along.
Hmm.
Now, was there some financial pressure, with things you wanted to do and you wanted to travel or you wanted to explore, and
Yeah,
there
it
were
has always been a problem for me. In my childhood, I was supported by my grandparents very much.
Uh-huh.
Um, but yeah, I'm not the best with the economy. Yeah, I have
And
to
do you
say.
have a brother or sister?
No, I'm biologically the only child.
Okay.
But the wife to my father, she has a daughter, 5 years older than me,
Mm.
and she had very much been dominating. She is very bossy, so that adds to the picture that I was
Yeah.
I felt stupid and
So
yeah.
you see that even though, it's not a biological sibling, it's still Mercury. It's still in the family dynamics. Step brothers, step sisters are also Mercury. So you see with the Mars that there can be some conflict and competition between the siblings. Now, I'm asking another question. With your father and your stepsister, um, was there money issues? Like, did she make more money? Did she receive more money from him?
My stepsister.
Yeah.
Actually, this is a little tricky because my dad told me that years ago that she had been taking money, stealing from him,
Uh-huh.
and also her mother, and so on.
Okay.
So there was, yeah, there was.
I mean, you have to ask because there's money matters,
Yeah.
Mars in Taurus, and it squares Venus and Mercury in the 12th house. So either you can say, maybe there's some favoritism and one child gets more money, or, in this case, it's actually a Saturnian issue because she's doing something forbidden. She's breaking the law, so to speak. So that
That's
whole aspect of stealing money has to do also with the sun in Capricorn and also with Mars, quincunx, Neptune in Sagittarius, which can have something to do with dishonesty or wasting resources. So thank you for sharing that. There's a question, Atusa, who says, how do we see the separation? You look at the relationships of your parents through Venus. Because Venus is not just your relationships, it's also your role model in relationships, how mother and father got along. So with Venus retrograde square Mars, Mars represents separations, individuality, and it represents tension, conflict. So it can mean that there's a divorce, or it can mean that they just didn't get along, and that there were probably also fights around money. Did he pay alimony? Was he okay with the payments for your mother, your father, when they divorced?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So
Can you explain why it has to do with the sun and Mars?
you mean the money issue, the stealing
Yeah.
money?
Yeah.
Well, Saturn has to do with, and Capricorn has to do with, I'm doing something that's not ethical.
Mm.
So, because Saturn is teaching you to be ethical. So, you see with that Saturn Sun in Capricorn that there's something unethical with the sibling.
Yes.
And then, by association with the conjunction to Venus and the square to Mars, you tie it to money in second house.
Amazing. Yes.
I mean, after the fact, it's always easy to see, but you could see that there are a lot of struggles and boundaries around money.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's something that we can keep exploring with your chart, because it's a very interesting chart like that. But we have to close because we are way over time. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Bernadette. And
Thank you very much.
you'll get the recording later today or tomorrow. Have a good weekend, everyone.